Almost every day I find these small moths flying around both inside and outside of my house. They seem to be the creatures that eat rice, flour, and other grains. Recently I found an unusually large moth on the wall, and I touched it lightly to kill it, but not squash it against the wall. It is almost the size of my fingertip. As I was looking at it, I noticed that it was still alive, and it started to lay an egg, just like that headless wasp in my other video. So I put it down and watched it, and it laid a couple of eggs. They were somewhat sticky and clinging to one another and to the moth itself. I ended up with a total of 6 tiny eggs, each about the size of one line in my fingerprint. Butterflies are pretty, but these moths are rather drab, apparently to hide themselves among vegetation and dirt. The legs on this moth look like tiny twigs. The entire moth is covered with a random pattern of light and dark brown spots, except for its eyes. The legs are covered with very tiny hairs. When you touch a moth, it looks like dust is rubbing off onto your finger, but they are actually tiny scales, similar to the scales on a fish or a butterfly. I'm lightly rubbing this wing with a needle to knock off some of those scales. The scales are not one solid color. At one end they are dark, and at the other end they're almost clear. This wing is on a piece of white plastic, which makes the clear end of the scales difficult to see. Along the edge of this wing are some very long scales. What is the purpose of these? Are they to make the edge of the wing seem more fuzzy and difficult to see? The smaller scales that cover the surface of the wing overlap so nicely that they almost look like woven cloth. I put this wing on a piece of black plastic. This makes it easier to see the light end of the scales, but more difficult to see the dark ends. When you rub all of the scales off of the wing, you are left with a translucent material. There are ribs running along this material, and between the ribs are rows of what look like little dots. The scales were attached to those dots. I think the wings are prettier without the scales. They are almost iridescent. Of course, without the scales, the moth would attract more attention, which is why they have the scales. What are those scales made of? And what is the wing made of? Is there blood flowing through that wing? The next day I looked at the eggs, and I could see that instead of being completely white, there were a few reddish-brown splotches inside. 2 days later, the splotches were darker in color. The eggs are not symmetrical. They are like geodesic domes that have a concave bottom. By the 5th day, it was easy to see a head with a mouth that was opening and closing. I am moving the light source around so that you can get different views of the eggs. When the light is from the side, you can see inside the egg better. On the beginning of the 6th day, I found one of the eggs was empty, and a caterpillar was crawling around. I put it on this ruler. Each of the lines of the ruler is 1 millimeter apart, so the caterpillar is about 1.5 millimeters long. It would frequently stop walking and wave its head around as if it's smelling or looking for food. The bottom half of the caterpillar is white, and the upper part has some sort of pinkish internal organs. It didn't seem capable of eating people, so I put it on my fingertip. Its body is thinner than one of the lines on my fingerprint. A few hours later, I noticed that all of the eggs were developing holes. Apparently, these eggs do not crack open. the caterpillar has to eat through the shell. As I move the light to above the egg, you can see the geodesic dome quality of the eggshell. And when the light is on the side, you can see easily inside the egg. I did not see any liquid inside the eggs or any egg yolk. So I suppose that all of the liquid in the egg was used to make the caterpillar. Here is one that is just about ready to cut through the eggshell. And finally, it is ready to start climbing out of its shell. Within about 6 days, these eggs transformed from just a bunch of chemicals to a creature that was capable of chewing a hole in its shell. It also knows how to crawl and look for food. Were these eggs partly developed inside the moth? Or do they actually create a caterpillar in only 6 days? Can you imagine what the world would be like if human women were giving birth to babies after only 6 days of pregnancy? And if their babies were capable of crawling around at that time? These eggs, and the wasp larva in my other video, transformed from a translucent sack of chemicals into a living creature at an incredible rate. As this one climbs out of its eggshell, you can finally get a good view of its head, mouth, and the pink organs at the top of its body. It's also amazing that this caterpillar has hairs all over it. Did the hairs start to form before the caterpillar was completed? If the caterpillar had to be created first, and then the hairs grew on it, that means the hairs had to grow within a day or two. This caterpillar is having trouble getting out of its shell because he's trying to walk on smooth plastic and he cannot get a good grip, and the eggshells seem to have a slightly sticky quality to them. After one of these caterpillars climbs out of its shell, it seems to be much too long to fit inside such a tiny eggshell. The leaves on my apricot tree are full of holes from some type of caterpillar or insect, so I thought maybe these caterpillars would enjoy an apricot leaf. But none of them were interested in it. So I gave them a flower petal and some rolled oats, but they didn't like either of those. Here is one of the caterpillars on the edge of the apricot leaf. He shows no interest in eating it. He crawled over to the stem of the apricot leaf and looked around. What is he looking for? They were finicky eaters, so I just threw them away.